Tell me something, she said, eyes finding mine across the fire. Did you picture your CEO like this when you took the job? I looked at her once. Slowly. Not even close. She smiled, just barely, and picked up the utility knife from the sand. Good. Means you'll actually pay attention. I paid attention. Very carefully. Before we begin, has a single moment ever made you forget every professional boundary you thought you had? Tell us in the comments, subscribe, and let's begin. My name is Jace Wren. I'm 31 years old. I grew up in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, in a house that smelled like motor oil and old library books. And for most of my adult life, I have been the kind of man nobody notices until something goes wrong. That's not self-pity. That's the job description. I work in logistics. Worked, I should say. Past tense matters here. And by the time I finish telling you this story, you'll understand why. I was a junior logistics coordinator at Marlowe Global Solutions. Yes, same last name as the woman who owned it. That coincidence used to make people at the office smirk. I never found it funny. I found it exhausting, the way people assumed things about a name. My name got me nothing. I earned every coffee-stained report and every red-eye flight on my own. Cassidy Marlowe was my CEO. I had seen her in person exactly 4 times before that April morning, and each time she looked like she had been assembled by a team of professionals whose only job was to make the rest of us feel approximate. Blonde hair, the kind of pale gold that looks almost silver in fluorescent light, always pulled back tight, not a strand out of place. Blue eyes that didn't invite conversation so much as audit it. She wore authority the way other people wear skin. It never came off. Or so I thought. I need to tell you something else before we get to the crash. Something I haven't told many people, because it sounds dramatic out of context, and I have always hated drama. 3 weeks before that flight, I received an anonymous email. No sender name, no domain I recognized, just a string of numbers and a single line of text. Someone on your floor has been moving money. Watch who flies with you to San Juan. I forwarded it to IT. IT said it was likely spam. I told myself they were right. I deleted it from my inbox, but not from my head. And that is the kind of mistake that quietly ruins a man. The decision to know something and do nothing with it. The flight to San Juan on April 28th was supposed to be a routine logistics summit. 12 people from our New York office, a charter out of JFK, 4 hours in the air, 2 nights in a hotel, back by the weekend. I had my laptop bag, a carry-on, and a window seat I hadn't asked for. Cassidy Marlowe was seated 4 rows up, in the front section separated by a thin curtain that might as well have been a wall between continents. Grant Aldridge, our CFO, was on that plane too. I remember watching him board, tense suit, easy smile, the kind of man who fills a room not with presence, but with noise. He stopped to say something to Cassidy near the front. She nodded without smiling. I noticed that. At the time I filed it under none of my business. We were somewhere over the Atlantic, about 2 hours out, when the turbulence started. Not the usual kind. The kind that makes the flight attendant stop walking and grab whatever is closest and go very, very still. I looked out the window and saw the left engine trailing something dark. The plane dropped. The overhead bins burst open. Someone screamed. Then everything tilted sideways, and the world became nothing but noise and metal and the hard white terror of understanding that you are falling and there is absolutely nothing you can do about it. I do not remember the impact. I remember the silence after it. The way silence after catastrophe sounds louder than the catastrophe itself. I woke up inside the broken skeleton of that plane, and the first thing I heard, before the fire, before the ocean, before any of it, was a voice. Calm, clear, sharp as a blade pressed flat. Don't move. Not yet. I turned my head. Crouched in the aisle 3 feet away was Cassidy Marlowe. Her blonde hair was plastered dark against her face with sweat and salt water. Her white blouse was torn at the sleeve. There was a streak of ash across her cheekbone like war paint. She was looking at me the way a person looks at a problem they have already decided to solve. She pressed 2 fingers against my collarbone, checking, assessing, then wrapped a strip of torn fabric tight around my left shoulder before I even understood that my shoulder was the reason I couldn't breathe properly. On 3, she said. She pulled on 2. The pain was extraordinary. I bit through it and tasted blood, and she said, "Good. You're still functional." Behind her, the ceiling was on fire. I want to tell you that in that moment I felt brave, or certain, or something worthy of the story I'm now telling. I didn't. I felt the cold, specific terror of a man who suddenly remembers an email he should have taken more seriously. But I got up, because she was already moving, and something about the way she moved, like she was absolutely certain I would follow, made not following feel like the worst option. We jumped into the ocean together on the morning of April 28th. The water was cold and brutal and alive. Neither of us knew yet that we were the only ones who would. The beach was real. That was the first thing my brain confirmed when my knees hit wet sand and I stopped moving. Not a dream. Not shock. Real sand, real sun, real pain burning up my left arm like a lit fuse. I rolled onto my back and stared at the sky. It was the kind of blue that belongs on postcards. Wide, clean, indifferent. Late April down here near the Caribbean meant warmth even in the morning, and the sun was already pressing down with intention. Somewhere behind the treeline, birds were calling. The world smelled like salt and smoke and something green and alive underneath both. Cassidy was already on her feet. I don't know how. I genuinely do not know how a person survives a plane going into the ocean and stands up inside of 3 minutes. But she did. She stood at the edge of the surf with her arms at her sides, staring out at the place where our plane had been. A thin column of dark smoke was still rising from the water, bending slowly in the wind. While I watched, a low boom rolled across the surface, muffled, final, and the last visible piece of the fuselage slipped under the foam and was gone. She didn't move for a long moment. Her jaw was tight. Her hands were shaking, barely, just at the fingertips, and I don't think she knew it. Then she turned around and became a CEO again. Inventory, she said. Shelter, water, signal. We assume no rescue for 72 hours minimum. There could be other survivors, I said. She looked down the beach in both directions. Nothing. No movement. No voices. No wreckage close enough to suggest anyone else had made it to shore. She looked back at me with those blue eyes and said nothing. That silence was its own answer, and it was one of the hardest things I have ever had to accept. We were it. 2 people out of 12. I made myself stand. My shoulder had settled into a deep, nauseating throb, dislocated. I was fairly sure, rather than broken, which meant I still had use of the arm if I was careful and stupid enough to use it. Cassidy had already moved up the beach toward a dark shape half buried in the wet sand. She pulled it free, a torn emergency kit, canvas and buckles, soaked through. Most of it was destroyed. But inside a sealed interior pocket we found 3 things that mattered. A flare gun with 2 cartridges, a packet of water purification tablets, and a folding utility knife still in its plastic casing. She held the flare gun up and looked at me. Boy Scouts, she asked. It was exactly what I had said on a different version of this story, in a different life, about the signal mirror. Somehow she had already figured out that I was the kind of man who had useful, unglamorous skills. Close enough, I said. We worked the shoreline for the next 2 hours. I found a foam seat cushion and a long strip of aluminum fuselage, bent but reflective, good for signaling. Cassidy waded into the shallows without hesitation and hauled out a waterlogged suitcase that turned out to be hers. Soaked blazer, cracked tablet, broken heels. She looked at the heels for exactly 1 second and set them aside without comment. At the bottom of the case, wrapped in a dry cleaning bag that had somehow held, was a dark cashmere sweater. She handed it to me without being asked. For tonight, she said. The temperature drops. I took it. Thank you. She was already walking away. By midday we had shelter, rough, half open, built against a cluster of palms using seat cushions and a panel of fuselage as a lean-to roof, but shade was shade. We had purified water from a shallow inland creek I found by following the sound. We had 2 protein bars from the emergency kit that we split without discussing how to split them. She just broke each one precisely in half and handed me my portion like it was the most natural thing in the world. We ate in silence. The island hummed around us. Insects were waking up in the April warmth. Not the full summer chorus yet, but enough to remind you the world had its own agenda entirely separate from yours. The email, I said. She looked at me. 3 weeks ago. Anonymous. It said someone on our floor was moving money. It said to watch who flew with me to San Juan. I kept my eyes on the treeline. Grant Aldridge was on that plane. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of something she was deciding whether to hand me. I know, she said finally. 2 words. Quiet, precise, and heavy enough to change everything. I turned to look at her then, Really look, at the ash still faint on her cheekbone, at the blonde hair drying now in the April heat, loose for the first time, falling past her shoulders in a way I had never seen. She looked like a different woman. Or maybe she looked like the real one. How long? I asked. She looked out at the ocean. Long enough that I should have moved sooner. She paused. Long enough that I'm ashamed of it. That was the first true thing she had ever said to me. The island held us in its green, indifferent hands, and the afternoon light moved slow and golden through the palms, and somewhere under all of it, the clock on something unfinished was still running. The first night was the hardest. Not because of the cold, though the temperature did drop the way Cassidy had predicted, sharply, the way late April nights near the Caribbean can surprise you, warm day peeling back to reveal something rawer underneath. Not because of the sounds, though the island at night was a different creature entirely from the island at noon. Clicks and rustles, and the deep, unbroken rhythm of the ocean pressing against the shore like it was testing how much we could take. It was hard because of the silence between us. The kind that forms when two people know something important has been said, and neither one is ready to finish saying it. She had told me she knew about Grant. She had told me she was ashamed. And then she had closed, the way a door closes when someone on the other side leans their full weight against it. I didn't push. I had learned early in life that pushing a closed door without permission tells you more about yourself than about what's behind it. I took the first watch. My shoulder had stiffened badly through the evening, and every movement came with a tax I paid in clenched teeth, but sitting upright and still was manageable. I fed small pieces of dry bark into the fire we'd built at the edge of the tree line, close enough to the beach to be visible from water, far enough from the palms not to be stupid about it. The smoke rose pale and straight in the still air. Maybe someone would see it. Maybe no one would. I kept feeding it anyway because the alternative was sitting in the dark, and I have always been better at doing than waiting. Around what I guessed was 2 a.m, Cassidy spoke from behind me. My father built Marlowe Global from a shipping office in Newark, she said. 40 years. He handed it to me 6 years ago, and 3 months later had a stroke. He can't speak now. He communicates by tapping his left hand. 1 tap yes, 2 taps no. She paused. He taps constantly. He has opinions about everything and no way to say most of them. And I visit every Sunday, and I sit there, and I try to guess what he's telling me, and I mostly get it wrong. I didn't turn around. I understood this was not a conversation that could survive eye contact yet. Grant Aldridge was my father's hire, she continued. His personal choice. His most trusted person. And for 4 years Grant has been quietly routing contract payments through a shell company in the Caymans. Not enormous sums at first. Careful. Patient. The way a man operates when he knows the owner can't talk and the daughter is busy trying not to drown in a company she inherited instead of grew. Her voice was even, but there was something under it. Something compressed, and old, and very tired. I found out 8 months ago. I hired an outside forensic firm. I built the case quietly because I needed it airtight before I moved, and because every time I thought about what my father would think, she stopped. You wanted to be certain, I said. I wanted to be worthy of being certain, she said. There's a difference. I thought about that for a long time, watching the fire. The email I received, I said carefully. Someone else knew? Someone inside the company. Yes. 1 word, and the weight of it suggested she already knew who. She just wasn't ready to say the name out loud in the dark on an island where we had no way to act on it. I respected that. I filed it away. On day 3 we found fresh water that didn't require tablets. A narrow stream that came down from higher ground through a fold in the rock, cold and clean, tasting of nothing, which after 2 days of chemically treated creek water felt like a miracle. I knelt down and drank with both hands, and felt something close to gratitude, so profound it embarrassed me. Cassidy knelt beside me and did the same. When she sat back, water was dripping from her chin and her blonde hair was loose around her shoulders. She'd given up on keeping it tied back. There was nothing left to tie it with that wasn't already holding something else together. She looked over at me, and for the first time since the crash, there was something in her expression that wasn't strategy or control or grief. It was almost amusement. You have sand on your face, she said. I have sand everywhere, I said. I've made peace with it. She laughed. It was small and quick, and she seemed slightly surprised by it herself, as though she'd forgotten the mechanism still worked. It did something to the air between us, loosened it, The way a window opened in a room that's been shut too long. That evening she told me about her mother. How she'd left when Cassidy was 9. No warning, no scene, just a Tuesday morning and then gone. A note on the kitchen table that her father read and folded and never showed her. How she'd spent her entire career building walls from the inside and calling it discipline. How she'd become the kind of woman people respected from a careful distance. And how for a long time she had told herself that was enough. Was it? I asked. She looked at the fire. I'm on a deserted island with a man I barely know, and I just told him more than I've told my therapist in 2 years. She glanced sideways at me. What do you think? I thought the island was doing something to both of us that we hadn't agreed to and couldn't stop. I thought the walls she'd built were good walls, constructed by someone who knew exactly what they were keeping out. And I thought that sometimes it takes a catastrophe to show you that everything you built to stay safe is also the thing keeping you from being found. I didn't say any of that. I handed her the last half of a protein bar. She took it. Our fingers touched briefly in the exchange. Neither of us commented on it. But neither of us moved away. Time moves differently when there is no phone to check. I know that sounds like something you'd find printed on a coffee mug, the kind of observation that gets called profound by people who've never actually been without one. But I mean it in a mechanical sense. Without a screen telling you the hour, time stops being a line and becomes something more like weather. It has pressure and texture, and sometimes it moves slow and heavy, and sometimes it breaks open and rushes past before you can name what just happened. By day 6, I had stopped counting hours. By day 9, I had stopped counting days in any anxious way. I still marked them. A small cut on the inside bark of a palm near our shelter, 1 line per morning. But the marking became ritual rather than desperation. Something to do with the hands at dawn while the fire came back to life, and the island exhaled the night's cool air, and the sky turned from gray to coral to the particular clean blue that belongs only to late April mornings over open water. Cassidy noticed it on day 7. You're calmer, she said. Not a compliment exactly. More like a field observation. She was shredding palm leaves into strips for a repair on the shelter roof, her hands efficient and automatic now in a way they hadn't been at the start. Hard to panic for 9 days straight, I said. The body gives up eventually. I haven't, she said quietly. I looked at her. She wasn't saying it as strength. She was saying it as confession. I know, I said. She had held herself at full tension since the moment she'd stood up on that beach. I watched her do it every day. The way she reset herself each morning like someone manually rebooting a system that had crashed the night before. She slept badly. I could hear it, the restless shifting, the occasional sharp intake of breath that meant whatever she was running from in her sleep had found her again. I never asked. I just kept the fire going a little longer on those nights, because light seemed to help even if neither of us said so. On day 10, she told me about a man named Daniel. She said it sideways, the way she said most personal things, attached to something else, almost incidental. We were sorting through what remained of our supplies, checking the 2 remaining flare cartridges for moisture damage, and she said, I was engaged once. For years ago. His name was Daniel Hale. He was kind and patient and genuinely good, and I ended it because the company was in crisis and I told myself I didn't have room for both. She turned a flare cartridge over in her fingers. He married someone else. They have a daughter now. I saw a photo on the internet last year, and I sat in my office for 40 minutes doing nothing, which I think is the longest I have gone without doing something productive since I was approximately 8 years old. Do you regret it? I asked. I regret the reason, she said. I made the company the excuse. The truth was I didn't know how to let someone stay. She set the cartridge down carefully. I still don't. Or I didn't. The didn't landed between us like something she hadn't planned to say. I let it sit there. I had learned by then that Cassidy Marlowe needed space after honesty the way a room needs air after a fire, not to be sealed off from, just given a moment before you walk back in. On day 11, a storm came through. Not the vicious kind. We were past the worst of it by the time it reached us, but enough. Rain heavy and warm. The way April rain gets when it can't decide if it's winter anymore. Sheeting sideways off the palm canopy and turning the beach into a mirror. We pulled the shelter walls tight and sat close without discussing it, shoulders touching, listening to the rain work itself out overhead. The fire hissed and fought, and I fed it carefully, and it survived, which felt important in a way I didn't examine too closely. At some point in the night, she fell asleep against my shoulder. The injured one. I didn't move. I sat in the dark with the rain coming down and her weight against my arm, and I thought about the email again. I thought about Grant Aldridge and his easy smile and the shell company and the 40 years her father had built and the stroke that had taken his voice at the worst possible moment. I thought about the fact that our plane had gone down on a route that Grant had been involved in booking. I thought about whether that was coincidence, mechanical failure, or something a prosecutor would one day stand in front of a jury and call by a different name entirely. I didn't have proof. I had pattern recognition and a very bad feeling. I filed it in the same place I filed everything I couldn't act on yet, and I watched the fire, and I let her sleep. Day 12 arrived clean and bright, the storm completely gone, the kind of morning that seems almost apologetic about what the night was. The beach looked washed new. The SOS sign we'd built from dark stones and pale wood above the tide line stood clear and readable, each letter a full body's length across. I was standing at the water's edge checking the signal mirror angle when Cassidy called my name from behind me. Her voice had a texture I hadn't heard before, not command, not confession, something quieter. I turned. She was standing at the shelter, and she was looking at me with an expression I had no professional category for. She crossed the sand between us with the same directness she applied to everything. She stopped close enough that I could see the faint scar on her chin she'd gotten on day 2 from a piece of fuselage, and the way the April sun caught the gold in her blonde hair and made it look almost warm rather than just pale. When we get back, she said, things will be complicated. I know, I said. I need you to know that what's happened here. She stopped, recalibrated. I need you to know that I know the difference between survival and something else. And this, her hand touched my wrist briefly, just fingertips, is something else. Behind me, the ocean moved. Above us, a bird crossed the blue. I opened my mouth to answer her, and then I saw the white shape on the horizon. I have thought about that moment many times since. The white shape on the horizon. The way it moved differently from clouds, steady, purposeful, cutting the line between sea and sky with the clean certainty of something built by human hands. I stood there with Cassidy's fingertips still on my wrist, and I watched it grow from a suggestion into a shape into a vessel, and I felt two things simultaneously that had no business existing in the same body at the same time. Relief so deep it made my knees soft, and a grief I wasn't prepared for, because rescue meant the island ended. And the island, for all its hunger and rain and pain and sleepless nights, the island had been the only place in my adult life where everything was exactly what it appeared to be. No titles. No floors of a building separating people into categories. No emails from anonymous senders warning me about things I wasn't supposed to know. Just two people, a fire, a beach, and the slow, honest work of staying alive. I wasn't ready to give that back. Coast Guard, I said. My voice came out thinner than I intended. Cassidy was already standing differently. I watched it happen in real time. Her spine lengthening, her chin lifting, her shoulders settling into that precise geometry of authority she wore in boardrooms and press conferences. The CEO assembling herself from available parts. It was not performance. It was survival of a different kind, and I understood it even as I felt the distance it created. The inflatable boat hit the sand hard and fast. 2 medics, 3 officers, a man in a dark suit who had the unmistakable look of someone sent by lawyers. They called her name before they were fully out of the water. Ms. Marlowe. Cassidy Marlowe. She answered them calmly and immediately, and within 90 seconds, she was giving instructions about secure communications and the New York office and something about a board statement that needed to be ready before markets opened. Her voice carried over the engine noise and the surf with complete control. A medic put a hand on my chest and steered me toward the boat. I went. At the last moment before they separated us into different sections, her hand found mine and held it. 1 hard squeeze, 2 full seconds, and then she let go and turned back to the man in the suit. I looked back once as the cutter pulled away. The island was already shrinking. The SOS sign was still visible above the tide line, patient and permanent looking, though I knew the next storm would take it. The palm where I'd cut my daily marks was too small to see from this distance. The place where we'd kept the fire was just a shadow on the sand. I faced forward and didn't look again. 3 weeks later, New York was aggressively itself. I sat on the floor of my apartment in Brooklyn with a putty knife and a baseboard that needed repainting, and the particular exhaustion of a man who has survived something large and is now expected to care about small things again. Traffic on the street below. The neighbor's television through the wall. Dex let himself in with the spare key I'd given him years ago, dropped a bag of groceries on the counter, and looked at me on the floor with the expression of a man who had been worried but was constitutionally opposed to saying so directly. HR called, he said. They want you back. Hero desk, pay raise, the whole story. No, I said. Because of her? Because of me? I said. I'm not the same person who sat at that desk. That desk doesn't know it yet. He nodded slowly, which was the Dex version of a long conversation. He turned on the television to fill the silence, and there she was. Cassidy stood behind a podium in a charcoal suit, her blonde hair back in its familiar precision, cameras firing around her like a slow storm. The banner beneath read Marlowe Global CEO addresses fraud allegations. Grant Aldridge stood half a step behind her in a tan suit that suddenly looked less expensive than it used to. His easy smile was working hard and not quite making it. I set down the putty knife. Cassidy spoke without notes. She laid out everything. The shell company, the forged approvals, the 4 years of carefully redirected funds, in the flat, precise language of someone who has been waiting a long time to say a true thing out loud. Grant tried to interrupt twice. The second time, security appeared at his elbow with the quiet efficiency of something long planned, and he was walked off camera still talking, and she did not watch him go. Then she looked directly into the lens and said my name. She said I had made every call that kept us alive. She said I would not be used as a scapegoat for crimes I had helped to expose. She said it without drama, the way she said everything that mattered, like a fact, like something the record needed to contain. Dex looked at me. I looked at the screen. 3 firm knocks at the door. I knew before I opened it. She was standing in the hallway in jeans and boots and a plain dark coat, her blonde hair loose around her shoulders the way I had only seen it on the island. She was holding a paper bag in one hand and a thick envelope in the other, and she looked, for the first time in all the time I had known her, like she was not entirely certain what happened next. That uncertainty on her face was the most honest thing I had ever seen. I brought food, she said, and a proposal, not a job offer. A partnership. Your name on the door. Equity. A field division, logistics, rescue, remote operations. You build it your way. Dex materialized from somewhere behind me, lifted both hands, and was gone. The door clicked shut. She stepped inside. The apartment felt different with her in it, smaller in dimension, larger in everything else. And the other thing? I asked. The thing that isn't the envelope. Her eyes met mine. The CEO mask was present but thin, and behind it I could see the woman who had laughed at the stream on day 3 and slept against my shoulder in the rain and told me about Daniel Hale with the careful sideways courage of someone practicing at being known. Us, she said, is not a clause in a contract. It's a choice. I'm here to find out if you still want to make it now that the world is loud again, and I'm complicated, and you can see me clearly in good lighting. I stepped closer. My hands found her waist. I didn't pull her in. I waited, the way the island had taught me to wait, to let things be what they actually were instead of rushing them into something manageable. Her fingers curled around my wrist. Don't stop, she said. So I didn't. When we broke apart, I kept my forehead against hers and listened to the city outside doing its relentless thing. Horns and sirens, and the 10,000 sounds of a place that never stops moving. And inside all of it, there was this one still point. Her breathing. Mine. The envelope on the table. The food getting cold in the bag. Partners, I said. She nodded once. Partners. I turned the deadbolt. The small clean click of it sounded, in that moment, exactly like a promise kept. We had survived the island. Now came the harder, better, necessary work of surviving everything else, together, in the light, with our names on the same door. And for the first time in a long time, I was not afraid of what that meant. Thanks for watching. If this story meant something to you, please like and subscribe for more unforgettable stories about love, resilience, and second chances.